Hello again, folks. Today we're into the penultimate chapter of Matthew's Gospel. It's chapter 27. And what can be said about this chapter? If you'd never read the Bible before and you knew nothing about it, and you were just kind of making your way through it for the very first time, and you came to this chapter, you might be absolutely stunned. How could the Son of God, the Messiah, the Saviour of the world, be crucified on a cross? How could Jesus be dead? Surely not. These are the things that you might be saying. And yet this was the moment that Jesus had been preparing for all along. In fact, this was the moment that the entire Bible had been preparing us for all along. Ever since Genesis chapter 3, we've been heading nowhere else but here, to the cross of Calvary, where Jesus Christ would go to his death to save the world from sin. So let's have a quick look at some of this chapter. We start with Judas coming to his end, and it's in a very graphic way. Judas was overcome with guilt and shame. He betrayed Jesus for money, but he never even got to spend it. He regretted what he had done almost instantly. And it's amazing how sin warps the mind, isn't it? Judas knew Jesus was innocent of these charges. He knew he didn't deserve death, but he was driven by greed. Remember Jesus' words in chapter 6, you cannot love both God and money. You cannot serve two masters. And I do wonder if he had Judas in mind as he said that. Regardless, Judas had chosen his master, and it was money. He loved wealth more than he loved Christ. And look where it got him. And there's a huge lesson in this for us. Sin and evil desires will drag us down even the darkest, the very darkest of paths in life if we're not careful. It promises us things that it just cannot deliver. Satisfaction, happiness, and so on. But it always fails to live up to the mark. And we're left feeling nothing but regret and remorse. For Judas, well, he was so blinded by his guilt and his shame that not only did he turn down the money that he was given, he even turned down the forgiveness that God offers through his limitless grace and mercy. Forgiveness that Jesus had shown and taught about right in front of Judas's eyes. And sadly, though, Judas, well, he goes to his own death without making peace with the Lord. By this stage, Jesus has now been transferred for Roman trial. He stands before the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate, and we get a real sense here that Pilate just doesn't have a clue who this is standing before him. Pilate asks him questions and asks him about the charges that are being brought before him, but Jesus is silent, and he's doing that to fulfill prophecy from Isaiah chapter 53. And the amazing thing for me about this whole encounter is that Pilate thinks he is in control, but in actual fact, he's not in control of anything. He thinks he has power over Jesus' life, but he doesn't. He thinks he has power over the Jewish people, but he doesn't even have that. He kind of tries to reason with them. He says, oh, sure, it's this custom. I'll release a prisoner here. You know, you've got Barabbas or you've got Jesus. And Barabbas was a murderer and a thug. So Pilate, he's thinking, oh, they'll definitely pick Jesus here. Problem solved. Happy days. But no, it backfires. He has no sway over the people at all. And in the end, Barabbas then gets to go free. So Pilate now has two problems on his hands. But this is an amazing moment. This murderer who deserves the chains and deserves the cross gets to go free, while Jesus, the innocent man, takes his place on the cross and goes to his death. But folks, yet again, this was all part of God's plan. So when Pilate asked the question, who do you want to go free, in front of the crowds, who do you think Jesus would have voted for? Would he have voted for himself? Oh, please let me go free. Please let me go free. No, he would have voted for Barabbas as well. And that's the whole point of the story. It's the whole point of the whole Bible, in fact. This was exactly why Jesus was going to the cross. He was going to lay down his life voluntarily for the sinners of the world who were desperate to find freedom, desperate to find salvation. A famous preacher once said that the Father treated Jesus like Barabbas so that he could treat Barabbas like Jesus. Amazing. And folks, the Barabbas in the story, of course, is us. Because of Christ, we get to go free. It's freedom from chains. It's freedom from death, whilst he goes in our place to the cross. This is amazing. grace on display here. And so after Pilate's feeble attempt to persuade the crowds, he washes his hands of the whole thing, and Jesus is handed over to the people to be crucified. And so we reach this big crescendo. But it's not just the big crescendo of the Gospel of Matthew, of course. It's the crescendo of all human history, isn't it? Everything has pointed to here. And the disciples hadn't realized it at all. They had mostly fled by this point, abandoning Jesus out of fear. Rather appropriately, though, since this is the part that Jesus must do alone, his followers could not follow him here. On the cross, he experienced the worst agony imaginable. And I'm not talking about the brutality of his death, because many others have been crucified through history, and dare I say it, many others have had similar, if not worse, physical deaths. No, the true agony that Jesus felt was the very thing that he screamed out in verse 46. So despite the physical pain, there was only one question on Jesus' mind. Why was he being forsaken by his Father? Because in that very moment, the Father turned his back on his Son. Jesus had never experienced anything like this. He was eternally bound in a completely perfect, loving relationship with his Father. Not even a trace amount of dispute or disagreement between them. And now, in this moment, the Father turns away from him. Jesus shouts out, "Why?" Of course, it's rhetorical, because Jesus knows why. Jesus knows that he's taking upon himself the full wrath of God. This is a perfectly holy God who must deal with the sin of his people justly, and the only way it could be done was for Jesus to willingly and graciously take the punishment upon himself. The words of Isaiah 53 ring out in our minds at this moment, written hundreds of years before. And it says, "Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed." We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Of course, thankfully, Matthew's Gospel does not end in chapter 27. If it did, if the whole Bible just kind of came to an end at this point, it's the end of the story, then actually we would just have to discard it. It wouldn't have any relevance for any of us today. But it doesn't end there. And in one sense, the story is only just beginning. So folks, that's us for today. Join us tomorrow afternoon. We'll finish off Matthew's Gospel and we'll look at the all-important, all-significant resurrection of Jesus Christ, Easter Sunday. Until then, God bless.